I still remember the moment as if it just happened. I was curled up under my threadbare blanket in the small clearing behind the church, the one place where the wind felt weakest, when the first police car rolled into view, its headlights cut through the darkness like a searchlight sweeping across an empty stage. I sat up slowly, heart pounding, and watched as a second cruiser joined it, then a third. Red and blue lights bounced off the side of my tent and danced across the nearby gravestones. I didn't know why they were here, what trouble I could possibly be in, but the pounding in my chest told me this was serious. My name is Marcus, and that night everything changed, because earlier that day I had found a wallet. I hadn't known then that returning it would lead to a moment like this. It wasn't until hours later, after the flashing lights, after the stern officer peered into my tent after the bewildered whispers from my fellow campers, that I understood why those cars had come. But let me rewind, so you can see how it all began. I woke up that morning to the slow scrape of garbage trucks on wet pavement. The sky was a pale gray. Rain from the night before had pooled in the potholes, making small puddles that rippled as I walked by. I shuffled through my few belongings, an old backpack with a ratty sweatshirt, a pair of mismatched socks, a dented metal cup. I hadn't eaten since the day before, but breakfast wasn't on anyone's agenda. I slipped my feet into a pair of scuffed sneakers and headed toward town, hoping to find work washing dishes or mowing lawns. Maybe someone out there had a few dollars for odd jobs. As I walked past the diner on 5th and Main, the early morning regulars were finishing their coffee. The neon open sign buzzed quietly from inside. The sweet smell of bacon and syrup teased me, but I didn't have 5 cents to spare. Instead, I hunched my shoulders against the damp air and kept moving down the street. At around 10:15 a.m., I passed a cluster of people waiting at a bus stop. That's when I saw it. A black leather wallet lying on the curb just inches from the yellow line. It looked out of place, pristine even, with a subtle sheen as if someone had taken good care of it. Nobody else seemed to notice. Maybe they assumed it belonged to one of them, or maybe they were too busy staring at their phones to look down. I hesitated. My first instinct was to keep walking. What could I do with a wallet, I thought? Probably empty. But something in me shifted. I knelt carefully on the damp asphalt and picked it up by a corner, half expecting it to slice my finger. It didn't. Instead, it felt surprisingly heavy. I unzipped the middle pocket gently, unsure if it was a trap. Inside, I found a stack of bills, more cash than I'd seen in weeks. There were receipts folded in one side, a few business cards, and ID cards in a clear plastic window. The driver's license said Andrew Palmer, with an address in a nice neighborhood toward the northern edge of town. The birth date showed he was in his mid-30s. Underneath his photo, I saw he was a project manager at a local tech firm. Heart pounding, I closed the wallet and stared at it for a long moment. I could use that money, so could any of the guys back at the camp. A meal, maybe a night at a shelter, a clean shirt. But the face in the plastic window felt like a real person, someone who'd probably spend the next few hours worried sick. No, I told myself, I couldn't keep it. Not this time. I slid the wallet into the inner pocket of my sweatshirt, zipped it shut, and continued past the bus stop. For the next 2 blocks, I imagined every scenario. Someone in a messy apartment, retracing steps, calling banks to cancel cards, panicking. And me, safe in the darkness, feeling guilty and haunted. By the time I reached the community center, near the library, my mind was made up. I had to return it. At 10:47 a.m., I ducked into the main lobby of the technology firm, Palmer & Co., where Andrew Palmer supposedly worked. The building was a sleek glass tower, shiny and tall, reflecting the gray morning sky. My shoes slapped against the polished floor as I approached the security desk. A woman in a crisp navy blazer glanced up, her eyes narrowing as she took in, my worn clothes and unwashed hair. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, voice polite but guarded. She had one of those name tags that read, Karen. "You look lost. This is a private building." I swallowed, my pulse hammering in my throat. "I found this wallet," I said, holding it out carefully. I think it belongs to someone who works here." Karen's eyebrows shot up. She took the wallet and examined it, flipping it open. "Andrew Palmer?" She frowned. "He's in a meeting right now. You can leave it with me, and I'll make sure it gets to him." I nodded, but before I could push on, a security guard appeared behind her, tall and broad, arms folded. He gave me a curt once-over, my frayed jeans, the threadbare sweatshirt with holes in the elbows. He cleared his throat. "Sir, you can't loiter here. If you're not here for a job application, you need to leave." My heart sank. "I just wanted to return this," I said softly. "I found it on the street." Karen glanced at the guard, awkward. "I'll take responsibility." "Thank you." She looked at me again. "Are you okay? Do you have somewhere to stay?" Taken aback, I shook my head. "No." It was an honest answer. More than anything, I wanted to say, "Could you give me a minute to explain?" But I didn't. Instead, I forced a tiny nod and backed toward the exit. As I reached the door, I felt the guard's eyes boring into my back. I stepped outside into the cold air, my palms sweaty, and wondered if leaving it at the desk had been the right call. I walked away quickly, rounding the corner so they couldn't follow me. My head spun with what-ifs. What if Andrew Palmer never got it? What if it was stolen or thrown away? I couldn't let that happen. So with my mind set on one thing, I headed to the bus stop, dropped a few coins into the fare box, and rode toward the northern neighborhood where his address was listed. It was a risk. Bus fare cost me half a day's bottle collecting earnings. But I felt a fierce determination burning inside me. I had to see it through. By 11:30 a.m., I stood in front of a modest two-story house with freshly painted siding and a manicured lawn. The driveway held two sedans, and a man wearing a button-down shirt and khakis was unloading groceries. He glanced at me warily as I approached, my hands buried deep in my pockets. I called out softly, "Mr. Palmer?" He turned slowly, eyes narrowing when he saw my clothes. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice cool but not unkind. I lifted the wallet in my hand. "I found this on 5th and Main. I turned it in back at your building, but I wanted to be sure you got it. I hope that's okay." Andrew Palmer blinked, his expression unreadable. He took the wallet, opening it with fingers that trembled. He counted the cash inside, inspected the cards, then locked eyes with me. "You didn't have to do that," he said, voice low. "You could have kept it. Nobody would have known." I shrugged. "I know," I said. "But I couldn't. I'd feel bad." He studied me for a long moment as if trying to measure whether I was lying. Finally, he closed the wallet and offered his hand. "Thank you." His grip was firm and surprisingly warm, calloused at the tips from who knows what kind of work. "I appreciate it." I nodded and stepped back, losing my nerve. "Take care," I muttered, then turned and walked away. As I moved down the sidewalk, I heard the front door open and close behind me. I glanced back once. Andrew Palmer was standing there watching me, his expression unreadable. I felt a jolt of pride, but it was mixed with a hollow ache. For so long, I had felt invisible to everyone. Today, I'd done something that made him notice me, even if only for a moment. By midday, cloud cover had thickened, and the temperature dropped. I walked back into town, my mind a swirl of thoughts. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe there was goodness left in the world, even for someone like me. I made my way to the soup kitchen down on Maple Street, where volunteers served hot meals to people without homes. I stepped in line and waited, holding my empty metal cup. When I reached the front, The volunteer smiled at me and ladled a generous portion of chili into a styrofoam bowl. I scarfed it down gratefully, letting the warmth fill my chest. While I ate, I watched the people around me, some nodding politely, others lost in their own thoughts. A man with a long gray beard sat across the table, picking at his food. He glanced at me and nodded. I gave a small smile back. I realized that of all those faces, mine might be the only one who felt any real sense of purpose that day, because I'd done something right. After lunch, I returned to the camp behind the church. My spot was just a patch of leveled earth with a couple of wooden pallets beneath my thin blanket. I set down the meager bag I'd put my things in that morning and flopped onto my makeshift bed. It was early afternoon by then, around 1:45 p.m., and a pale sun peeked through the clouds, offering a sliver of warmth. I closed my eyes, trying to rest, but my mind buzzed with what might happen. What if Andrew Palmer told the cops I gave him the wallet? What if they assumed I'd stolen it? I had no papers, no proof. I was just a homeless guy, after all. And in this town, the police rarely give a second thought before hauling someone like me to jail on suspicion alone. Around 3 p.m., my stomach began to growl again. I debated whether to go back to the soup kitchen for dinner or save my pride and wait until morning. But something inside me catalyzed. The memory of Andrew's eyes when he'd taken the wallet. He hadn't handed it back. He'd thanked me. I had to keep going, keep doing right, if I wanted that feeling of human decency to last. I grabbed my backpack and headed toward the bus station, hoping to find stray bottles I could redeem or maybe a stray dollar someone had tossed behind a dumpster. By 6:45 p.m., dusk had settled. The sky was a deepening blue, and streetlights flickered to life one by one. I walked up Jefferson Street, my backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning for anything of use. A discarded bottle, a crumpled paper cup, maybe a forgotten coin. Just as I passed the convenience store, I noticed an empty sports water bottle half buried in the grass. I stooped, grabbed it, and rinsed it under a nearby spigot. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. I tucked it into my bag and continued. When I returned to the camp behind the church, the area was already cloaked in night. A handful of tents glowed softly under the street lamps. My home, such as it was, a collection of mismatched tarps and blankets. I shuffled to my own tent, fumbled with the thin zipper, and crawled inside. The moment I laid down, my eyelids felt heavy, but I couldn't sleep. Thoughts churned. What if someone reported me for trespassing? What if Andrew's landlord called the police home? My breathing grew shallow as I tried to push the fear away. At exactly 8:13 p.m., I heard distant sirens. First one, then another. My heart lurched. I forced myself to lie still, hoping the noise would pass. But the sirens grew louder, closer. At 8:17 p.m., I heard the engine of a police car rumble into the clearing. The low hum of 2 more vehicles followed. Red and blue lights pierced the mesh of my tent, splattering color across the thin fabric walls. "Police!" a voice called out. "Step away from the tent and keep your hands where we can see them!" My pulse slammed against my ribs. My first thought was, they've come for me because I returned that wallet. I fumbled for a moment before pulling myself to a seated position. I zipped open one side of the tent and poked my head out, blinking as the bright lights hit my face. 3 officers stood before me, 2 with flashlights trained on me, one holding a folded piece of paper. "Are you Marcus Jenkins?" the officer with the paper asked, his voice harsh but measured. I swallowed hard. "Yes," I managed to say, voice quivering in the cold night air. "I'm Officer Daniels," he said, stepping closer so the others formed a semicircle behind him. "We have a report of a stolen wallet. Is there anything you'd like to tell us?" I blinked, confusion and fear tangling inside me. "Stolen wallet? No, sir. I found the wallet and returned it to the owner this morning. I swear, officer." Daniels narrowed his eyes. "Do you have any proof of that?" I opened my mouth to speak, but realized I had no receipt, no witness other than his word against mine. My stomach felt hollow. I don't know. He thanked me. He lives on Elm Street, Andrew Palmer. Daniels exchanged a look with the other two officers. One of them, his name tag read Sanchez, shone his flashlight on my lap where my backpack lay. You got anything in that bag? I shook my head. Just my things, sir. Clothes, a blanket, some bottles. My voice was small. He nodded, then asked, "Have you been living here long?" "A few months," I said. "Ever since I lost my job and couldn't pay rent." Officer Daniels unfolded the paper in his hand. It looked like a typed statement, maybe a police report. "Andrew Palmer says he didn't receive his wallet this morning. His credit cards were canceled. He's missing over $500 in cash. He's certain he left it on 5th and Main." I felt a cold shock ripple through me. "That can't be right," I said, panic creeping in. I returned it to his office. "You can check with the security guard." Daniels held up a hand. "We already did. No wallet was turned in this morning. Did you ever see the man in person?" "Yes," I said, throat tight. "I saw the man, and he thanked me. He took it." "I swear!" Sanchez jotted something down on a notepad, stepping around to inspect the tent floor. "Is there anyone here who can back up your story?" he asked, glancing at my thin blanket and ragged clothes. "Any friends?" My breath caught. The other campers were frozen inside their own tents, faces pressed to fabric, watching through small tears or slits. None of them moved. I shook my head. "No, I'm alone." My voice cracked, and a lump formed in my throat. Daniels folded the paper and tucked it into his jacket. "We need to bring you in for questioning. If this is a misunderstanding, it'll be cleared up. But you're under arrest on suspicion of theft." He clicked handcuffs behind my back. I flinched as cold metal snapped around my wrists. "But I didn't steal anything," I whispered, my eyes burning with tears that I wouldn't let fall. "I returned it. I swear." Still, they led me out of the tent, onto the damp ground. Flashlights swung overhead, illuminating every inch. Each old teddy bear. Each empty soup can. Each damp blanket. I tried to stand tall, but my shoulders slumped under the weight of embarrassment. Two officers guided me to the squad car, its doors squeaking as they yanked them open. I was shoved inside, face first, handcuffed so tightly I thought my wrists might break. The cold vinyl seat felt like an ice block against my skin. As they slammed the door shut, the tent behind me looked smaller, more fragile, like it would burst into flames at any moment. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass window and watched as Officer Sanchez waved to the others, then ducked behind the wheel. They'd set up flares around the clearing, casting the rest of the camp in an orange glow. I saw some of the guys I'd shared tents with for weeks huddled together, mouths moving but no sound reaching me. I wanted to shout at them, "I didn't steal it. I returned it." But my words felt jumbled and useless. Instead, I closed my eyes and let the tears come, silent but hot against my cheeks. At 8:45 p.m., the car's engine roared to life, and we drove away from the tent site. The sirens hadn't gone off, but the flashing lights were enough to tell everyone around that something big had happened. I felt every head turn as we passed, each glance an accusation, a verdict already sealed. They took me to the station on Pine Avenue, a low gray building whose windows glowed with harsh fluorescent light. When they processed me, they asked for basic information, name, date of birth, anything unusual. I told them where I slept, but they looked at me like I was inventing stories. They booked me in, took my fingerprints and a mug shot. I had to peel, the old sweatshirt off my back, my only change of clothes, for a scan. The officer who took the picture looked at me with pity, then shrugged and snapped the photo. It was me, captured in the worst moment of my life. Puffy eyes, dirty face, a face that pleaded, "I didn't do it." While I sat in the holding cell, I tried to piece together what went wrong. I'd done everything right. Hadn't I? Returned. The wallet. Told the truth. Provided an address where Andrew Palmer had lived. Yet here I was, locked behind steel bars, the slot in the door clacking open twice while guards slid food under. The first tray was a bowl of watery soup that tasted like mud and a slice of moldy bread. I pressed it away, unable to swallow. The second tray, around midnight, brought a small packet of crackers and water. In that cell, alone, time slowed to an excruciating crawl. At 2:30 a.m., I heard the heavy thud of footsteps on concrete. The slot in the door rattled open. "Palmer wants to see you," a voice said. My heart leapt. "What? Right now?" I rasped, voice cracking like dry timber. The guard nodded. They unlocked the door, and I was escorted down a narrow hallway. The walls were painted institutional gray, and the fluorescent lights made everything look washed out, unreal. They led me into a small interview room, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs. Andrew Palmer sat on one side, his face shadowed by the single overhead bulb. He looked tired, his cheeks were sunken, and his eyes were wide, haunted. He folded his hands on the table, then looked up at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Marcus Jenkins," he began, voice low. "Thank you for coming." I sank into the chair across from him, my hands still cuffed in front. "You wanted to see me?" I asked, stammering. He nodded and exhaled. I checked with my wife. I asked her to search all our apartments. I called the building manager. I retraced my steps. No one turned in my wallet at the office, and no one claims to have found it anywhere. My bank cards were canceled by midday, and I was out of town. I only learned it was missing when I tried to withdraw cash at an ATM. He paused, and for the first time, I saw the pain behind his eyes. I realized I'd left it on 5th and Main, and I panicked. I took a shallow breath. "I returned it to you at your office building around 10:47 this morning. Karen at the front desk took it." He closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. "I went there. Karen said no such wallet was turned in. The guard said he didn't see anyone matching your description. They didn't log it." He opened his eyes and looked at me. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I've just been so frantic. When they told me they were bringing you in, I didn't know what they'd do." My chest tightened. "I swear to you, I gave it to you today. You thanked me." He nodded. "Yes, I remember it now. I was in a hurry. I must have set it down on the desk and walked away. My assistant probably threw it in some bin by mistake." I felt a surge of relief, so intense it made my teeth ache. "So, you got it?" He reached into a folder on the table and pulled out a black leather wallet. He opened it, revealing the same worn receipts, the same business card, but no cash. He looked at me, eyes searching. "The cash is gone," he said gently. "Did you—" I shook my head. "No. I left it in there. I didn't touch it. In fact, I left it on the desk and walked out. If it's missing, I don't know what happened." He closed the wallet slowly and set it between us. "Listen, Marcus, I believe you. I know you didn't take it. I'm sorry for what happened." I waited for the rest, bracing myself. "You don't have to apologize," I whispered. "It happens. People make mistakes." He shook his head. "No, I owe you. I want to help." His voice trembled. "I asked the police to bring you in so I could face you. I didn't want you in a cell any longer for something you didn't do." Relief and gratitude washed over me. My shoulders sagged. "Thank you," I managed to say. "I just want to go back home." He nodded and spoke to the officer behind me. In moments, the cuffs were off my wrists. The guard pushed the door open, and I stepped out into the hallway, blinking against the harsh lights. Andrew followed me, pulling a folded envelope from his pocket. Here, he said, handing it to me. My check. It's more than what was in the wallet. You can get a place to stay or food, whatever you need. My eyes stung with tears. I took the envelope with trembling fingers but did not open it. I can't take this, I whispered. He gave me a firm look. You found my wallet and returned it. Not many people would do that. This isn't charity, Marcus. It's gratitude. He paused, then added, If you don't want it, I'll donate it in your name to the community center, but I hope you'll take it. I studied his face, a mixture of shame and genuine kindness, and nodded. Okay, I said, voice cracking. I tucked the envelope into my sweatshirt pocket. Moments later, the guard escorted me through the station's front doors. I stepped into the crisp night air, free at last. Andrew Palmer stood on the sidewalk, waiting. He extended his hand. I shook it, feeling the warmth of his grip. Thank you again, he said, his voice low and sincere. If you ever need anything, food, shelter, a ride, call me. I mean it. I nodded, and as I turned to leave, I felt a heaviness lift from my chest. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while I felt seen. When I finally made it back to the camp, by walking 2 miles under a sky studded with stars, I paused outside my tent for a moment, watching the faint glow of the streetlights. Inside, a couple of the other campers waited for me, their faces a blend of relief and curiosity. I had expected them to be angry, maybe jealous that I'd been out there returning wallets while they struggled to get a warm meal. Instead, they looked at me with respect. I tilted my head and gave a small nod, then crawled inside and collapsed onto my pallet. My mind strained to reconcile what had happened. I'd been arrested for doing the right thing, then released because the owner believed me. It felt like living in 2 worlds at once, one where I was deemed a criminal, another where I was an honest man. I lay there, eyes open, staring at the thin plastic lining of the tent roof. My stomach growled softly. I hadn't eaten since the watery soup. Slowly, I pulled the envelope from my inside pocket and sat up. I tore it open and fanned out the bills, $200 in crisp notes. It was more than I'd dreamed of seeing in a day. I counted each one, 20s, 10s, 5s. My hands shook as I pressed them flat against the rough wood of the pallet beneath me. I could pay for a bed at the shelter, maybe buy some warm clothes, a jacket that didn't smell like mildew. For the first time, I felt hope stir like a tiny ember in my chest. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I listened to the soft breathing of the others in their tents and thought about what Andrew Palmer had said. If you ever need anything, call me. I had no phone, but somehow I believed him. His gratitude wasn't a lie. I fell into a fitful doze around 3:50 a.m., feeling the weight of events settle over me like a blanket. When dawn broke, I awoke to a pale, washed-out sky. I struggled to sit upright, the pallet's slats digging into my back. I reached for my backpack and found a scrap of paper with a hastily scribbled phone number and address, Palmer Residence. Beneath it, Andrew's name. My pulse quickened. I stared at it, wondering if I had the courage to call. I didn't know if they'd answer or if they'd be disappointed, but I felt a determination taking root. I realized that this moment, was my turning point. I packed up my few belongings and pointed my steps toward the bus station. I had enough cash to buy a one-way ticket to the shelters on Jefferson Avenue, a place with beds and hot showers. But I also had something else, a chance at something more. Once I'd cleaned up, I would call Andrew Palmer, find out who he really was, and perhaps return the favor that made him see me for what I was. Not just a homeless man, but a person worthy of respect. At 7:22 a.m., the bus rumbled down Jefferson Avenue. I sat by the window watching storefronts slide past, faded signs, broken sidewalks, coffee shops with early morning patrons. I clutched the envelope of cash in one hand and the note in the other. My thumb traced Andrew's phone number. I felt a jolt of fear. What if he'd changed his mind? What if he thought I was some con artist? But the memory of his eyes, the tightness around his mouth when he'd said, "I owe you," gave me courage. By 7:55 a.m., I stepped off the bus at a modest bus stop near Jefferson Avenue and Maple Street. The shelter was 2 blocks ahead, doors open wide to the morning chill. I took a deep breath and walked in. Inside, a volunteer greeted me with a warm smile and guided me to a small cubicle where I could shower. For the first time in months, I felt water streaming over my skin, hot, clean, and real. My emotions ripped through me in sobbing bursts, as soap washed away the grime, the roughness of the street, and even the fear that clung to me like a second skin. When I emerged, wrapped in a thick towel, I looked in the mirror. The reflection showed a man I'd almost forgotten, a man with bright eyes behind tired lids, a man who could still stand tall. I dressed in donated jeans and a flannel shirt. My shoes shined and laced. In my pocket, I carried Andrew's phone number and the envelope of cash. I felt ready to make a call, ready to step into a world I'd long believed was closed to me. Just after 9:00 a.m., I dialed the number. My hand shook as I pressed each digit. When it rang 3 times, I thought my heart would leap out of my chest. Then a woman's voice answered. "Hello?" "Hello," I said quietly. "Is this Andrew Palmer?" Pause. "Yes, it's Marcus Jenkins." Another pause. "Please hold." The line clicked over to music, soft piano chords that felt ironically luxurious. I closed my eyes, bracing myself. After a minute that felt like an hour, the call returned. "Marcus, how are you?" "I'm better, sir. I thank you for everything." My voice cracked, and I blinked back tears. Andrew cleared his throat. "I'm glad to hear it. I was wondering, would you be able to come by the office today? I'd like to talk to you about something." I swallowed. "Of course." "Great. How about noon? Can you make that?" "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." "All right. I'll have Karen at the front desk let you in. See you then." I hung up and exhaled a deep breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. At noon that day, I stood again in the gleaming lobby of Palmer & Co. But this time, I wasn't an intruder or a suspect. I wore a clean shirt, my hair combed back. I carried myself as best I could, confident, maybe even respectable. Karen greeted me with a warm smile and motioned me to sit in a plush chair near the reception desk. A few minutes later, Andrew Palmer appeared from the elevator. He was dressed in a tailored suit, looking every bit the successful executive. He approached me with a broad smile that reached his eyes this time. No shadow of guilt, no hesitation. "Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." I stood and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for asking." He gestured toward a private conference room down a long corridor. "Let's talk." Inside, the room was bright and spacious, a large wooden table, leather chairs, and framed awards on the walls. He closed the door behind us and motioned for me to sit. I settled into a chair at the head of the table, the same one where I'd once been accused. This time, it felt different. He sat across from me, folded his hands on the table, and took a steadying breath. "Marcus, I've been thinking a lot about what you did, returning my wallet, coming back even after I saw you get arrested. It showed integrity and courage. I'd like to offer you a job." I blinked, fighting the urge to laugh at the absurdity. "A job?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "Yes. We're looking to expand our community outreach division. Corporate social responsibility. It involves working with local nonprofits, managing donation programs, and helping us create initiatives for people in need. I want you to run that department." My pulse hammered so loudly I feared he might hear it through the table. "Me?" I whispered. You want me to run it? He leaned forward, eyes serious. Yes. You know this world firsthand. You understand the struggles that many of our neighbors face. We need someone with empathy and real experience, not just someone with a degree. I closed my eyes, holding back tears. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he replied, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. He slid a folder across the table. Here's your contract. We'll provide housing assistance, a living, wage, benefits. You'll work closely with me and our executive team to develop programs that actually make a difference. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside was an offer letter, neatly typed, detailing salary, position, a start date, immediately. I looked up at him. Why are you doing this? He met my gaze, sincerity etched in every line of his face. Because you changed my life today. Because you reminded me that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can be the most powerful. I want to give you a chance. I want to help you build a future. I swallowed hard and nodded slowly. Yes, I said, voice thick. Yes, I'll do it. He stood and held out his hand. Welcome aboard, Marcus. I rose and shook his hand, this time without cuffs, without suspicion. As I left the conference room, I felt as though a door had swung open, one I never thought I'd see again. Down the corridor, I passed the security desk, where Karen gave me a knowing nod. I followed Andrew to the elevator and stepped inside. The doors closed with a soft hum. When they opened again, we were in the lobby. He handed me a key card. Here, he said. You can come in any time you need to work, even if it's late. I want you to be part of this. I took the card, feeling its weight in my palm, as heavy as the choices that had brought me here. The entire lobby seemed to transform around me, no longer a place that rejected me, but a place that welcomed me. As I walked out of the building and into the afternoon sunlight, I felt the warmth of hope fill me entirely. Later that evening, I sat in my new apartment, a small studio unit paid for by the company, unpacking a cardboard box of welcome gifts, a blanket, a notebook, a few books on nonprofit management. I carefully arranged them on the rickety coffee table and sank onto the lumpy couch. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, finding that wallet, returning it, facing arrest, standing before Andrew Palmer once more. Each step had led to this moment, a chance to rebuild. I thought about the people back at the camp, old Sam who always shared his coffee, Rosa who sang hymns at dawn, the kids who played tag between the tents. I wondered where they were now, if they knew, what had happened. I held my phone and dialed the shelter's number. The volunteer answered and offered a warm greeting. I asked if they still had beds open, and they said yes. I told them I wouldn't be returning. Instead, I asked if they could help Sam and Rosa get space in a transitional home. Her voice brightened. Absolutely. Come by tomorrow. I hung up and leaned back, eyes closed. A sense of peace washed over me. I'd gone from cold, damp nights on the ground to a place where I had a bed, no questions asked, and a job, a real purpose, something I'd never dared to dream possible. A week later, I stood in a small office at Palmer & Co., desk shiny and new, nameplate reading Marcus Jenkins, Community Outreach Director. My first task was to meet with a group of local nonprofit leaders in that same conference room where I'd once been accused. As I shook hands with the executive director of a women's shelter, I felt the truth of my new role settle in. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving, ready to pour my experiences into helping others. Each day, I watched older men like me pick up bottles, come into the office for a hot meal, or attend workshops on budgeting and resume writing. I saw their eyes light up when I told them, I was once right where you are. They believed me because I looked them in the eye, spoke their language. Every so often, I'd return to that scene in my mind, the 3 police cars surrounding. My tent, the harsh lights, the handcuffs. I remembered the fear, so raw and pure. And I remembered the enormous relief when Andrew Palmer chose to believe me. One evening, as dusk settled over the city, I walked past the church clearing where my tent had stood. It was empty now, tents moved on or abandoned. I paused and ran my hand along the cold metal plaque on the chapel door. I whispered a thanks to whatever force, from God or fate, had guided me that day to return the wallet. It had been the hardest choice I'd ever made, but also the most rewarding. Inside me burned a promise. I would never forget where I came from. Every program I built, every case I took on, would be a reflection of that night, of honesty, integrity, and a single act of kindness that turned my life around. Many would say it was just a wallet, just money. But for me, it was a lifeline. And as I walked into the gathering twilight, I felt the weight of it, not as a burden, but as a gift. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, one small decision can light the way forward.